I was just checking my mail, something as simple as that, but something caught my eye. My heart froze when I saw it. A letter with my full name written on the front. A heart drawn around it like it was a token of affection. It didn't feel right. I slid my finger under the seal, the paper ripping open like it had been waiting for me to tear it. The air around me seemed to grow colder, heavier. I pulled the card out, feeling the weight of it press down on my chest, and then my breath caught in my throat. The words were written in cursive, flowing like they were meant for me, as if I were the only one who could read them. It said, "I found you." My heart thudded so loud in my chest I could barely hear anything else. My head jerked up, eyes darting left to right, every nerve in my body screaming that I wasn't alone. How? How had he found me? I had done everything they said I should do to hide, to disappear. I moved across the country, left my family, changed everything, and for what? Nothing. He had found me. He was still out there. A wave of panic rose in my chest. I could feel hot, salty tears streaking down my face as I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it, my back pressed against the wood as I slid to the floor. I wanted to scream out to someone, but there was no one. I was alone and terrified. I wiped my face, tried to steady my breath, but my hand shook as I opened the card. My mind was racing. How had he gotten to me? How had he found me when I thought I was safe? The paper trembled in my grip as I read the words. "You thought you could hide from me, didn't you? Thought that I'd never get you back. We are meant to be together forever. I'll see you soon. From your one true love." A strangled sob tore from my chest, and the letter slipped from my fingers, floating slowly to the floor. But then, in the dim light, I saw something else. More text scrawled on the back. "P.S. Don't bother trying to leave town again. I have eyes everywhere." My breath hitched as I fumbled for my phone. I need help. I need to call someone. My fingers hovered over the screen as I opened my contacts, dialing Uncle Reynolds' number, praying he'd pick up. The line rang, each tone echoing like a hammer on my skull, until finally his voice came through. "Hello?" he asked. He found me again. I gasped, panic seizing my throat. "He sent a letter. He's in town. He's going to take me. He said if I try to leave again, he'll know because he has eyes everywhere. I need help, please, I need help." "Hey, calm down, all right? You're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady, trying to reassure me. "We're going to get you out of there. Just stay put. We'll get there soon. We'll—" The line cut out. A sharp chill slithered down my spine, my breath hitching as a new voice crackled through the line. It was low, mocking, like a predator playing with its prey. "Hey, baby. So I'm guessing you got my letter?" I froze, my legs turning to stone. My mouth went dry, and I curled up on the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. I bit my lip, willing myself not to scream. "Not gonna talk to me today, huh?" His voice was sickeningly sweet. "That's unfortunate. Well, I guess I'll do all the talking. Once I find you, we'll go to the cabin in the mountains. Just you and me, forever. I don't quite understand why you try to run from me. I know you still love me. I can't wait to see you again. Maybe now I'll get to see my little bun in the oven." A sick laugh echoed in my ear, sending waves of nausea through my gut. No, he can't," I whispered to myself. I could hear him breathing, heavy, like he was savouring the moment. I'll see you soon." The line clicked off and I was left in silence. I stared at my phone, trying to steady my breathing, trying to calm myself. I didn't know if I could make it another second in this hell. Then Uncle Reynolds' voice came through again, distorted. "Are you okay? Does he have you? What happened?" I tried to explain, choking on my words as I relived the horrors of the past few minutes. I told him everything I could, but my mind was spinning, racing. "You're going to be okay. We'll be there tomorrow morning," he said, his voice reassuring. "Stay inside, lock everything up tight, just wait for us. You'll be safe." I hung up, and a sob broke free. "He's going to take my baby," I whispered to myself. He said he would. "You're going to be okay," Reynolds' voice echoed in my head. But I didn't feel okay. I felt like I was suffocating. I moved through the house in a daze, locking every door, every window. I pulled the blinds shut and hid in my bedroom. I grabbed some snacks, stuffed them in my pockets, and retreated to my closet. It felt like the only place left to hide. I set up a little sleeping space in the corner, clutching a baseball bat in my shaking hands, trying to feel safe. "It'll all be okay in the morning," I told myself, my heart pounding in my chest. "Uncle Reynolds will save me. It'll be over then." The night dragged on, but eventually exhaustion claimed me. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on me as sleep swallowed me whole. I woke up to the loud crowing of the neighbour's rooster, and a jolt of terror ripped through me. I reached for my phone, and my stomach dropped. Hundreds of messages flooded my inbox, all from an unknown number. "I love you. Good night. Good morning, love. I can't wait to see how much you've grown." I clutched my stomach, my hands trembling. I couldn't escape him, but I had to. I had to keep fighting. I grabbed a granola bar, trying to steady myself as I checked the house. I was on edge, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I peeked through the peephole on the door, but the sight that met me made my blood run cold. Tape. There was tape over the peephole. Panic surged. I grabbed the pasta from the microwave, my hands shaking, and I sprinted back to the closet. I checked the time. It was 9:30 a.m. Then I heard the knock. Relief flooded through me. Uncle Reynolds. It was him. This nightmare was finally going to be over, but something stopped me. Something in my gut screamed that it wasn't him. I checked my messages with Uncle Reynolds. The last one was from before I moved to this town. He wasn't here. He wasn't at the door. My heart slammed against my rib cage as I locked the door and pulled the bat closer. A voicemail from Reynolds. I clicked it, desperate for something familiar. "Hey, this is Uncle Reynolds. I just wanted to say we'll be there at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Sleep well." I checked the time again. It was 9:33. My phone buzzed, but the messages wouldn't go through. I could hear boots stomping in the kitchen, then the sound of glass shattering. My stomach twisted in horror. "Come out, darling. I know you're here. Let's make this easy," he called, his voice dripping with malice. I froze. I couldn't breathe. My legs turned to jelly and I curled up into a ball, praying he wouldn't find me. But I heard him. His boots moving closer, closer, until he was in the bathroom. I could hear the cabinet doors slamming, him grumbling under his breath. Then a horrifying silence. He's right outside the closet. I heard the doorknob jiggle, and my body went cold. The door rattled, then, with a violent crash, it splintered open. The sound of his boots, closer, closer. "I found you, darling," he whispered, his voice gleeful. He kicked the door again over and over. I couldn't move. My breath was shallow. "It's over." Suddenly I heard a loud crash. The door flew open with a battering ram and light flooded the closet. I shielded my face, my hands trembling, expecting to be pulled out. But then I saw him, a tall black man in uniform, Detective Adams. "We've got him," he said gently, helping me to my feet. "You're safe now." I felt the weight of the moment sink in as I looked past him to see Uncle Reynolds. He was there. He was finally here. Tears welled up in my eyes as he pulled me into his arms tight, like he was never going to let me go. "We've got him in custody," Reynolds said, his voice thick with emotion. "He won't hurt you again." Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were tears of relief. I was safe. I was free. "You're going home," Reynolds said softly, his hand on my back. "You'll be released from witness protection. You won't have to hide anymore." I smiled through the tears. "You'll always be Uncle Reynolds to me." And I knew for the first time in forever I could finally breathe. Those kids in high school spent their summers at the pool or on some vacation, but I preferred the library. And not just any library. No, this place was a museum of old memories, a labyrinth of crumbling paper, forgotten births and death certificates, all catalogued in dusty drawers that creaked like the floorboards of some haunted mansion. The smell was a blend of must, stale coffee, and something older, something ancient that whispered of stories long past. The ceiling above groaned every now and then, as if a ghost was shifting its weight in the attic, and I loved it. Every inch of it. That's where I first came across Cyril Aberforce. At first it was just the name that caught my eye, so strange, so old-fashioned. Cyril Aberforce. The man's name could have been written in the pages of a Gothic novel, but no, it was real. His story was real, and it was the bold, ugly words murderer, convicted, that followed his name in the newspapers that yanked me in deeper. In April of 1838, Cyril Aberforce was found in a pool of his wife's blood. The kitchen was soaked in it. Maggie Aberforce, his wife, his only relative for miles, was dead, a butcher's knife still clutched in Cyril's trembling hand. They were both in their 60s, childless, living on a farm too far from town for anyone to hear the screams. The newspapers called it a tragedy born of a drunken rage. Aberforce had a reputation for drinking himself into madness during bad harvest seasons, and that year's rains had failed him. They speculated that he'd gone out of his mind, fueled by moonshine and frustration. But some accounts were darker. Some suggested a demon had overtaken him, punishing him for sins buried deep in his past. I couldn't find much more about those sins, though. The records were scarce, slipped through the cracks of time. That was expected. This was the 1800s after all. History wasn't neatly packed into boxes back then. It was fragmented, forgotten. But still, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't believe a man would murder his wife. Not in the way they described it. And then there was the strangest thing. Cyril swore he hadn't killed her. He claimed he'd found Maggie in the blood, lying on the floor. Distressed, He'd laid beside her, clutching the knife until someone found them. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It gnawed at me, like a secret buried beneath the pages. So, I drove home, my mind swirling, until a thought, an idea, struck me. Without thinking, I turned my mum's car around and headed for the grandest house in town, the mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel itself, the home of Julia Erford. I knocked for nearly 10 minutes before she finally answered. She was an old woman, brittle and sharp-eyed, her gaze like ice. When I asked about looking through her collection of old family papers, her eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. Mrs. Erford had been hoarding her family's history for years. Letters, journals and papers, some dating back to the 1800s. She refused to give them up to the museum, convinced that greedy monsters would photocopy them to death and sell them to the highest bidder. I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted answers. I sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of crumbling parchment, and as the hours ticked by, I found myself missing the neat card catalogue at the library. The smell was the same, but the air felt heavier here, as if time had decided to settle in these walls. Then I heard the familiar tap of her cane, and the door creaked open. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, voice as sharp as a needle. "No, not really," I muttered, barely looking up. "Then what on earth is so important that you disturbed my dinner?" I hesitated before answering. I was looking into the Aberforce murder. Her expression shifted at the mention of the name. "Ah, nasty business. My family preferred not to speak of it." I cocked my head, curiosity gnawing at me. "Why?" Her eyes narrowed as she stared me down. "Because the Aberforces were my relatives, child. My family changed their name after the Civil War to avoid the scandal. Erford's what we call ourselves now. For the sake of peace." My heart skipped a beat. "Maggie, she died here?" I asked, my voice low. Her eyes flashed with something cold. "Yes, child. Maggie died in the original farmhouse, which burned down, and this house was built in its place. The Aberforces, they were always here." "But the papers said—" I stopped myself, not wanting to sound like an idiot. "Yes," she interrupted. "The papers said Cyril had no family. But there's more to the story." I leaned forward, desperate to understand. "My ancestor, Henriette Aberforce, came with her husband to care for Cyril's child after his wife's death. They took the child in, kept it quiet, of course. It was all, well, complicated." "Wait," I said, confusion setting in. "But Cyril had no children. He didn't have any heirs." "Not true," Mrs. Erford snapped. "He had a child, a son, born of his affair with a young woman named Beth Smith. She was a nurse, a charity orphan, who took care of Maggie in her final years. But the child wasn't born until after Cyril was hanged." I recoiled. "That's disgusting." "Men are men," she said with a humorless grin. I was reeling. None of this made sense, but still I pressed on. "So, the child wasn't a motive for the murder. What was?" She let out a sharp breath. "The trial story was that Cyril drank too much and lost his head. That's what everyone believed." "But why would he kill her?" I asked, my mind racing. "With a butcher knife? No one would do that in a drunken rage." Mrs. Urford seemed almost tired of the whole thing. The answer lies in the details, but you won't find it here. The story happened almost 200 years ago. I couldn't let it go. Something about it gnawed at me. I just couldn't shake the feeling that Cyril hadn't been guilty. Mrs. Urford went quiet and looked at me with a sharp gleam in her eye. There's one thing left. My cousin Hetty's journal mentions something nobody talks about. I was on the edge of my seat. What does it say? Her voice dropped to a whisper. That Maggie's death wasn't what it seemed, and that if you want the truth, you should look in the old outhouse. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. The outhouse? She nodded grimly. You'll find the answers there. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. The old house seemed more oppressive now, a weight on my chest as I walked to the backyard, to the decrepit outhouse that looked like something out of a nightmare. The smell hit me the moment I opened the door, a thick, foul stench that made my stomach turn, but I didn't care. I was on a mission. I grabbed a shovel, ignoring the ache in my back as I dug through the rancid soil. I was just about to give up when my shovel struck something hard. My heart raced as I dug deeper, revealing a small metal box. It was locked, but as I cleaned it off, I saw 2 letters carved into the top. M.A. My breath hitched. Minutes later, Mrs. Urford returned with a ring of ancient keys. Try these, she said, voice a hushed murmur. And so we sat together, fumbling through the keys, until the 28th one clicked open. Inside was a sheaf of papers, bound with leather. I unwrapped them, and my heart pounded as I scanned the pages. Then I saw it, the final entry, dated the day of Maggie's murder. I froze. The words on the page burned into my mind. I've planned it tonight, as that little slut will be gone, so Cyril will take the blame. When he's hanged, hopefully the shock kills his Bathsheba and her spawn of the devil. I exhaled slowly. Maggie Aberforce killed herself, I whispered. Mrs. Urford stared at me, her face pale, her hands trembling. She knew. She knew. I nodded. She knew everything. And then, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on her, Mrs. Urford stood, her voice quiet and calm. The Aberforce and Urford women, we've always done whatever it takes to protect the family name. I recoiled. That's monstrous, I gasped. You would never... Her lips twisted into a thin, almost amused smile. Wouldn't I? And just like that, the air grew colder. The moment I stepped through the door, something was wrong. It hit me all at once, that eerie silence that filled the house. No excited squeals of "Manda, Manda" from the twins rushing to greet me. No warm hug from Mum, her voice bright as she tossed my backpack aside, asking, "Amanda, how was school today?" No teasing from Amelie, my 15-year-old sister, who usually bounded out of our room the moment I walked in, eager to show me some new thing she had discovered. No hum of the overhead fan, no sounds of life. The house was empty. The foyer, usually bustling with activity, stood still. It was an unsettling stillness that gripped my chest. This had happened before, 2 years ago, when Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and they all rushed to the hospital without telling me. The same empty silence. And when I got there, he was gone. Gone. I never got to say goodbye. The thought chilled me to the core, and panic started to claw at my throat. Please, not Mom, not Mel. Oh God, not the twins. If something happens to them, I didn't know what I'd do. I turned the corner, my heart pounding, bracing myself for whatever horrible truth awaited me. But what I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. The green was gone. The green, our green, the heart of our home. It had sat proudly on the mantel for as long as I could remember, a symbol of family, of love. Dad had carved it himself, painstakingly shaping it over 3 long years. I still remember the way he'd sit by the fire at night, his hands working the clay with quiet concentration, never telling us what he was making. We never asked either. It was enough just knowing it was there. But now it was gone. Stolen, destroyed. I couldn't comprehend it. My mind was spinning. Where is it? Who took it? Why? What are we going to do without it? A cough broke through my thoughts, and I whipped around, heart leaping into my throat. There they were, my family. My heart soared in relief. They were all right. They were standing together on the couch, staring at me with cold, empty eyes. But then I saw it, the way they were staring at me, like they didn't see me, not really. Their eyes were glazed, their faces expressionless. I took a step back, the unease growing in my stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Before I could say anything, they all stood up at once, simultaneously. It was like they were puppets, each movement too synchronized, too deliberate. They enveloped me in a hug, too tight, too forceful. Their arms around me felt like a prison, not a comfort. I gasped, pushing them away. What's going on? What is this? Amelie, my sister, my twin, was the only one who spoke. Her voice was flat, distant, like it wasn't even hers. Nothing, dear. Just close your eyes, just as we did. Give all of your prized possessions to the king. Surrender yourself to him, just as we did. You will attain true happiness. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. She had never called me dear before. What was happening to her? To all of them? Who's the king? I choked out. Are you okay? Blink twice if you need my help. She didn't blink. Instead, her bony finger pointed toward the corner. My blood ran cold. There, in the shadowed corner of the living room, stood a man. He was dressed entirely in black, with a hat pulled low over his face like a shadow itself. He leaned casually against the wall, watching us, watching me. How had he gotten in? When? What the hell was going on? The moment I saw him, I knew. He was the cause of this. The terrible, suffocating feeling that had settled over everything. He was the reason everything felt wrong. Amelie's lips curved into a smile, a quick, almost painful thing, like a flicker of some forgotten memory. But the man, his smile was something else entirely. It wasn't a smile. It was predatory. It was maniacal. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. Something pulled at me. My body froze. My eyes locked on his, and I couldn't look away. The man slowly lifted his hat. And what I saw, I wish I could forget. It wasn't a face. There was nothing there. Just a swirling, gurgling hole. A black void. It sucked at the air, pulling everything around it into its infinite emptiness. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, my body beginning to shake uncontrollably. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, smooth and hypnotic. "Don't go. Stay. Don't you want the truth? Don't you want peace and happiness? His words were kind, gentle even, but they didn't match his face, they didn't match the hunger I saw behind his eyes. It was a trick, but I couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about him, something in the way he gestured to me, like a snake coiling around its prey. I felt myself drawn in, compelled. I didn't want to listen, but I did. I couldn't stop myself. Then, as if snapping me out of a trance, he snapped his fingers. Everything around me shattered into chaos. The ground beneath me began to rumble. The bamboo floorboards Dad had made years ago cracked under our feet, splitting open like an earthquake had just begun. And then, with a sickening lurch, we all fell. Down, down into the darkness. The man, the king, I suppose, hovered above us, his cruel laughter echoing in the pit, his face twisting in madness. I couldn't feel the ground anymore. The pit seemed endless. The cold, empty blackness surrounded us, suffocating. But then I saw something, a glimmer, a shimmer in the air. The green. It was floating in front of the man, a soft glowing light in the overwhelming dark. I reached for it desperately, but something was holding me back. Something was keeping me here. I couldn't get out. I couldn't reach it. My mother screamed. She was crying, her hands reaching for it, begging, screaming. Mum never cries. The last time I'd seen her like this was when Dad died. The only other time. I tried to climb out of the pit to fight against whatever force was holding me down. My body screamed in pain, but I pushed on, reaching for the green. I thought, if I can just get to it, everything will be okay. But I didn't see the man's hand fall to his side. Didn't see it raise again until it pointed directly at me. I didn't hear the zap of electricity until it was too late. The shock hit me in the forehead and everything went black. I didn't know how long I was out. It could have been hours. It could have been minutes. When I came to, I was lying on the cold floor, my head throbbing. My family was gathered around me, their faces filled with worry, but they weren't themselves. "Where is he?" I croaked. "Where is he? Where is the king?" Mum held the twins close. Mel pressed her head to mine, her warmth a weak comfort. We were together, but it didn't feel like a family anymore. It felt like we were stuck in this place, this thing, and I knew somehow, deep down, that we would never leave. We were together, and we always would be.